So I haven't made any content about Diddy and what's happening because it's horrific, but there's something that's not being discussed to the level that I think it should. And so I want to use this moment to talk a little bit about wealth, the psychology of wealth, and materialism in general, and to share some research about something that psychology and researchers refer to as the dark triad. No, we're not entering conspiracy theory territory. That's just a really dramatic name. So, the dark triad is a psychological theory of personality that speaks to the coalescence of narcissism, Machiavellism, and psychopathy. So, as we know, because narcissism is a hot word on TikTok, narcissism generally speaks to a lack of empathy, a pridefulness, a fragile ego, and a general orientation to dominate others. Machiavellianism speaks to a willingness to exploit, harm, or degrade others for personal gain and a general indifference to morality. And psychopathy, which is a characteristic of most privileged folks within dominant systems until they do the work to do the belief system deconstruction, is generally a lack of empathy or regard for the humanity of others, right? So research shows that this coalescence of these three characteristics is particularly prevalent through empirical data, empirical evidence, to be present in the billionaire class, a fundamental characteristic of the billionaire class. So why does this matter, and how does this relate to Diddy and these freak-offs? Extreme wealth isolates people from being able to participate as a regular human being in humanity. To literally be a member of the human race completely shifts when people are thrust into or are able to obtain circumstances of extreme wealth. The thing is, we still have a human primate brain, right? Which naturally seeks novelty. This is where materialism comes in. Materialism is another characteristic that is super, super prevalent in folks of extreme wealth and even intermediate wealth, which essentially says that the concept of possessions in general, and what one can obtain through power, coercion, or money is more important than spiritual and existential needs. So the needs that we have to be in community, to be cared for, to recognize ourselves in relation to one another, to have a sense of empathy and morality as a participant in the human race, this kind of stuff flattens out when we enter situations of extreme wealth. And so let's think about what that would do to a novelty-seeking brain. When you are able to purchase, coerce, and dominate any single thing that you want in the world, where are you able to get that cognitive stimulus, that cognitive reward for novelty? In extremes. When these traits combine, it leaves a set of people with infinite resource, right? In the tiniest, most tight-knit minority community that exists on the planet, left to their own devices to figure out how to entertain themselves without any empathy, and where their only means of accessing what could substitute for spiritual wellness or collective wellness or existential wellness, actualization, is through domination, coercion, and violence, frankly. I imagine so clearly these parties being a place where people are thinking of the most diabolical, twisted things they can because they can. Almost in a competition style. How do I sit on the ladder? Hence the term freak off, right? There's a competitive nature to even the name of these parties. What is the most absurd, taboo, edge-crossing thing that I can think of, because we have created an empathy gap and a lack of boundaries for a small subset of our population. And I don't mean we like you and I mean the economic systems, the white supremacist economic systems that be have allowed this to foment and exist. Now, traits associated with the dark triad increase people's likelihood for criminality, increase people's likelihood to victimize others, and increase as people accumulate more wealth. So these are, again, they're not innate, baked into our bread traits and qualities. These are traits and qualities that develop as people gain more access to wealth and status. And as wealth continues to isolate these people, it becomes more and more difficult for them to see regular people as humans at all. Now, the piece about us being novelty seeking is really important, because this is something that's leveraged in our algorithms. There's a very popular Corn website that also uses this function of how our brains work, essentially to create more dependency on the platform by pushing people to more and more extremes. Let me give you an example. So if everyone can remember maybe their first glass of wine or their first shot, the experience of being drunk for the first time, right, was probably really intense and extreme because it was the first time. All of those sensory experiences were new, so it was novel, it was fresh, it was very immersive. But over time, right, as you gain up a set of expectations for the experience and a tolerance, you need more of that substance in order to have that same effect. This is the same thing, right? If you're able to buy any substance that you want to put in your body in the world, if you're able to essentially be able to hook up with any person that you want in the world, if you can purchase sexual favors, if you can purchase power, then what else is there to offer you this sense of novelty? What else can recreate those feelings of power and dominance, right? Because that's what we're trying to fill existentially. That's what we're trying to fill to actualize ourselves. That's the only thing at certain points of wealth that can make us feel something. What are the degrees that things end up having to be pushed in order to reach those initial sort of dopamine, serotonin responses? And so this, when you mix it all together, becomes an Ouroboros, because the more we commit acts of failed conscientiousness, of empathy devoid behaviors towards each other, the easier it is to perpetuate again, because what wires together fires together. So we end up continuing to isolate and alienate ourselves through the very, very bizarre experiences we're having as wealthy billionaires that can behave with impunity. And we continue to reinforce the dehumanization in our belief systems of others. This also overlaps with the sense that most extremely wealthy people see themselves generally as more intelligent, more entrepreneurial, more valuable as a human than non-wealthy people. This is the moralism of wealth, right? At a certain point, whether it's the Kardashians that you hear at Thanksgiving saying their prayers and saying they're so blessed and thankful, to the Elon Musks of the world believing they can walk into NASA and basically do the jobs themselves, there's a level of hubris that is devoid of any sort of context based in reality once a certain level of wealth is obtained, because you now occupy a world where there isn't a question of yes or no, can I do this? It's when and how. The concept of failure doesn't fundamentally exist. The concept of a no or a boundary doesn't fundamentally exist. Even the basic principles of law don't apply to you. And these qualities are brazenly praised, right, in the media. There was a Forbes edition in the 2010s that praised the sociopathic trait of CEOs that were super successful and entrepreneurs. People saw these qualities and characteristics as positive in leadership in boards and actively sought and platformed these qualities within their organizations and corporations. And because of that lack of empathy that I talked about before, there isn't an impetus in these spaces, in these freak-offs, to think, what is the most generous, wonderful thing that we can do here? Right? Because that imperative has been lost through the alienation from society, from reality, and from humanity in general. That sense of belonging, that sense of collective belonging has been obliterated by wealth and by class and by status. And the experiences that one either witnesses or engages within that create a sense of reality that is so warped, so incongruent with the reality of most people, that how could you even effectively ever carry your lived experience back into humanity without a significant amount of rehabilitative support? There's a real myth, especially in America, that the wealthy and the ultra wealthy somehow deserve or are worthy of our trust. And we are finding out time and time again the level of horrific and nefarious behavior that they are engaging in behind closed doors, and often met with little to no consequence. The way that wealth so fundamentally distorts one's self-perception means that there is never going to be a billionaire, including your Taylor Swift, including anyone that will ever be your friend or see you as human. The extreme prioritization of wealth, money, and materialism is antithetical to human nature and antithetical to humanity. It requires the dehumanization and subjugation of others for personal gain, for one's own individual personal gain. And it demands the retention of that wealth and the continuation of that domination by any means necessary. And that the only solution to this problem is to eliminate the concept of a billionaire class, of a wealthy ruling class in general.